Hello, friends. This is Mike Williams, the host of the Quay Radio Hour. The podcast that follows is an interview Sofia Smallstorm recently conducted with Dr. David Dortch. It's an excellent and eye-opening discussion exposing the inner workings of the corporate contract-based legal system that has victimized David Dortch and his family for over 2 years. It all started back in 2013 when the Dortch's 12-year-old son was charged with graffiti. What transpired after that, you will find very hard to believe. I would like to thank Sofia for granting permission to upload the interview. I've included additional links in the show notes below. And so without further ado, here's Sofia Smallstorm and Dr. David Dortch.
Hello everyone, this is Sofia Smallstorm. I'm here for you today with another guest, and it is my extreme pleasure to have here David Dortch, the optometrist from Riverside, California, Riverside County, and he has been through an absolute unbelievable, shocking nightmare. I mean, it is bad for us to hear, but imagine having to live through it. And his family has gone through it with him. There are now plenty of interviews online that you can go to for backstory. But I wanted to get David on record today to give his account of what has happened in the last few months, particularly. He's been apprehended, put in jail, knocked to the ground. I mean, all kinds of horrific stuff that he absolutely doesn't deserve, as he is one of the most honorable people you'd ever meet. So, Dave, welcome to my little show.
Hi, Sophia. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
I really have chills that I have you talking today, and I'm just hoping that people are going to really get to the nuts and bolts of this, of what can possibly happen to people in America. I mean, you're the example of that, right?
Yeah, it's been a rude awakening for my family and I. You know, we pretty much lived a pretty quiet life, not been outspoken about really anything in particular, and we've been pretty much redirected in life these last few years against our will, but it's been an eye-opener for sure.
So, I will link the show I did with Kim, and I will link the Red Ice show, and people can go there for the full background, because there's no point repeating all of that. But just to put it in a quick synopsis, you were a practicing optometrist with a successful business, minding your own business, and your house was raided. And when was this exactly?
This was back on the 20th of April, 2013.
Right. And you want to quickly do the synopsis?
Sure.
I mean, we'll make it short.
Absolutely. Well, on March 14th, 2013, just briefly, my son, who was 12 at the time, was basically picked up for doing some minor graffiti in our local neighborhood area. And that particular event was the first part of the whole eye-opening experience, because he was taken directly to the local Marietta police station, where my wife and I were forbade from being able to see him, have access to him for over 4 hours. And so at that point we realized that there were some definite inconsistencies with our viewpoints on what our rights were in this society and what we were being restricted from. And we basically weren't able to see our son, weren't able to get an attorney. So we stood up to the police department at that point and made our perspective known on this whole thing. Our son confessed to doing some local graffiti. They essentially, what they did is they blew the charges from misdemeanor to felony, and between 314 and the time for the first hearing that was set for his case, which was April 22nd, 2013, on 4/20, which was a Saturday, at 10 a.m. in the morning, the Marietta Police Department barged through our front door with a no-knock raid, basically. Well, actually, they did knock, but they just came straight through the front door without any warrant, without any probable cause, and it was all under the guise of searching for, quote-unquote, tagging and graffiti-related evidence related to what my son had done. And the whole thing became completely blown out of proportion. They took my son from the house that day. They kidnapped him, essentially. They didn't have any warrant to be able to do what they did. They occupied our home for a complete 7.5 hours, during which time they manufactured a scene which, it has been essentially what we've been dealing with ever since. During the many hours that they were occupying our home and we were restrained, I was basically handcuffed to a chair in my backyard on a piece of lawn furniture for hours while my daughter and her boyfriend were there after they took my son. And Kim had just happened to be out with a friend that particular day. She hadn't been out away from the house for a while. She had been studying for a particular class that she was taking at the time. And so she went down to the beach early that morning and had left the front door unlocked, unfortunately, which allowed the police to pretty much open the door and come right in.
So let me just stop you there.
Sure.
You said they knocked, and now you're saying they just opened the door and barged in.
Well, they did knock, but what happened was when my daughter was going to the door to see what was going on, as she was approaching the front door, she was about 4 or 5 feet from the front door, and she saw the front door knob starting to turn. And literally they opened the door and surprised her starting to walk in as she's approaching the front door. So they did not wait for somebody to answer the door.
And they didn't wait for any confirmation of whose house it was and where they were. Because, I'm thinking had the door been locked, they would have knocked or rung the bell, and then someone would have gone to the door, and then at that point they could have barged right past anyway.
Correct. And my daughter had the forethought to basically confront them, and she said, you guys can't do this. This is my house. And she really, really put them on notice herself, which I, in retrospect, wished I had have done. All I did was I called them on the fact that I said I demand to see a warrant, and they did not produce one. And I was more matter of fact, but I did not refuse to let them search my home. I didn't stand up the way that I would know to stand up now. And so I don't know what that would have amounted to. They were armed, so I'm not sure that it would have had any impact. But we do have a right to refuse to do contracting or to do business with these individuals. But nonetheless, they occupied our home for 7.5 hours, during which time they played pool on our pool table. They did a search through pretty much every room of the house, including the attic, the garage, all through the backyard, through pretty much every room. They even went through a lingerie locked box of my wife's that had, personal items in it.
Right, so they ransacked. But let me ask you this now. Being so far beyond that, especially in your education process, because you have delved into the study of all this contracting to a really deep degree. So what would you have done, what would you do if that happened today and none of this had happened to you yet? Imagine, let's just set the scene. So you've got your daughter, she's walking to the door, and I know you weren't in the room then, but let's just say they barged in, got past your daughter, and then you heard the commotion and you came to the scene. What would you say?
Well, for one, I'd like to imagine that, they would honor what I would say, period. We're dealing with, some pretty ignorant individuals that, they're order followers. So there's a fragile line between asserting yourself and asserting yourself to somebody who has a gun, and all they want to do is accomplish their objective, which is to follow orders and do what they're told to do. And they're not there to negotiate. They're not there to debate anything. But what I would have basically done, I believe, would have been to confront them on the fact that they had no business being there. I did not give consent to their presence to be there, and I demand that they produce a warrant immediately or leave. Period. And, I had the right to do that. I had the right to refuse, to not consent, to demand for them to leave my personal abode, my home, and I did not do that.
Okay, so you're saying that by by voicing your non-consent and denying them access, even if it's just verbal, that sets your position, and you didn't do that in the beginning.
That's correct.
But like you said, David, they had guns, and, I mean, what do you do? Some of these people just start going wild on you, you know?
That's correct. It brings up the whole situation of, confronting a police officer at a traffic stop, Sometimes it's just, it might be easier to handle things on an administrative level after the fact than to confront somebody that has a chip on their shoulder and is willing to do whatever it takes to get you to comply with what they're trying to do. So yes, there's a balance, and I know that, it's a touchy situation. I do feel like my daughter, the way that she handled things and the way that she addressed them in retrospect, looking back, she was the least touched, and they really didn't bother her as much as everybody else. They didn't really search her room to the same degree as everywhere else in the house. They let her keep her computer, whereas they took every other computer in the house. It was kind of strange, quite frankly.
So in a way, then, you're suggesting that they might have known more than you first gave them credit for in this interview. You said they were ignorant and they were people who follow orders.
Well,
now, I'm going to link a talk done by Mark Passio. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yes.
Yes, and he has done a talk on what he calls order followers, people who are order followers. So I'm going to put that link in with this show because it's interesting to get a deep exploration of that particular mindset, because that's what we are plagued by, David, today. We've got very few people who think for themselves and tons of people who will take these orders just so they can keep shuffling along and get their paychecks.
Absolutely. I believe I've heard that particular lecture that you're describing, and it was excellent.
Well, all right, so we're back at your house, and may I ask you this? Now, this may have some bearing, or it might be a really dumb question, but, we're going to get into this a little more, I hope, in the interview, but this whole idea of the contracts one makes. So you were in a house by some kind of contract. I believe it was a rental?
No, that was a home that we had a mortgage on that we'd been in for 14 years.
Okay, so that was your own house that you owned, so to speak, as the convention calls it, when you have a mortgage. So, but there was a contract, your name in capital letters on that loan and so forth. So do you think it was through that association that they came barging in? Because they're coming in for the straw man.
That's correct. That's a pretty intricate debate there, because there's so many different ways that we can be construed as contracting in a loose sense that that's certainly one plausibility. Even the terms that we use when we talk about a private dwelling versus a residence. The term a residence is implying that you're under a particular jurisdiction just by use of the term, and that you're also linked with the postal zip codes and whatnot related to the federal territories. And as opposed to, a private dwelling, which is part of being a natural man and a California native, essentially. I'm a native of the land of California. I don't claim to be a particular affiliate citizen related to a federal corporation. And so that may be a time and a place for another discussion, because it's easy to get diverted in terms of, I don't want to leave anybody hanging here if we get too caught up in that. But again, your listening audience may have a better understanding of things than what I realize.
Well, I know that, some of them do, and some of them are learning. I hope everybody is learning as we go along, because this to me is a new terrain, and it's very, very interesting. And it has tremendous potential.
Absolutely. If
you can actually start using it. So at the time, you were not versed in much of this. And you were then, you were targeted. They came after you. You were the bullseye. They fabricated evidence that you were running a meth lab out of your house, and then they have persecuted you and prosecuted, in all kinds of horrific ways, to the point that you were arrested in August, was it?
Let me go.
Okay, so go ahead. Follow it. Go into this any way you want.
Sure. Basically, when they first came in the house on 4/20, my daughter, her boyfriend, myself, and my son were all initially seated at a dining room table. And when they first came in the house, they didn't go straight to my son's room, which is what they claimed they were there for, to check his room. They were there to check for graffiti-related evidence. They, in fact, the first guys up the stairs went straight into the master bedroom, which was obviously the master bedroom. And they went in there and started searching that room before they went to his bedroom. And so when they went to his bedroom, they sent 4 armed guards or armed officers up there to wake him out of a dead sleep as a 70-pound 12-year-old. But when they went to our bedroom and we were sitting down at the dining room table, they came downstairs a little bit later and confronted me on the fact that they found some marijuana plants. And the marijuana plants were, basically determined to be legal, because Kimberly and I both had our marijuana cards legal at that point. And so when you asked about jurisdiction in the house, I also think that there's a good possibility that people who have these cards and register to get these cards are put on a list. And it's very, very possible that that particular list was something that they were accessing as well. And that at one point Kim had been to a clinic here in the local area that was under surveillance, and there were sheriffs at in the parking lot of this clinic, and likely taking down license plate numbers of anyone who was there. So they might have already done a link to that. And the fact that I was growing some plants legally, I don't know. It's speculation to some extent, but they might have deemed somehow that they saw our electrical usage with the use of the lights and whatnot to grow the plants. But nevertheless, those were determined to be legal, and they left me alone on that issue. They did not pursue that. But one of the officers said, since everything looks legal here, I think we're probably going to be out of here in about an hour. This was within the first hour of us being detained. Zachary was still there. He had not been removed from the house, which didn't happen till close to 1 o'clock in the afternoon. But they went back up to the master bedroom, and they closed the door. And they were up there for hours. And essentially, once they'd taken Zachary, which was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, that's when they took my daughter, her boyfriend, and I out to the backyard and basically handcuffed me to a chair till the rest of the day. That was till 5:30. And so they basically arrested me in my own home. But during that time, while we were outside, they went through everything, and they pulled different things from different parts of the house. And lo and behold, they manufactured what they called a active illicit clandestine lab. You said meth earlier. That is actually incorrect. they found some what basically was a tree bark that was a naturally occurring tree bark that was purchased legally online, and they extrapolated that into some sort of a precursor for meth.
Okay.
Well, they said initially, they asked, because there was a point at which they called me into the house, they unchained me and had me come into the house for a man-to-man, so to speak, discussion off the record, and asked me a little bit about some of the things they found. And again, in retrospect, I did say some things that I wish we hadn't discussed, but at the same time, everything was off the record. And they asked what this brown stuff was in this bag, and I told them it was a tree bark that was purchased legally, and they said that it looked like a precursor for methamphetamine. And I cleared the issue that it was not. So essentially, we found out later that they had in fact tested everything that they could find in the house for meth, and they found nothing. But this precursor that they supposedly found was this bark, and essentially this bark is something that is used in South America and other places to make a kind of tea that is used in various types of spiritual ceremonies and whatnot. And that's all it was. It was not meth. It had nothing to do with meth. But that's what they tried to construe it as, to make a whole bigger situation out of it. So, bottom line is, they tried to manufacture a lab scene, tried to construe it as being potentially meth, and it in fact had nothing to do with meth. There was nothing that ever came up as meth, and there was nothing even in the reports that even mentioned meth. That's the funny thing. So, that basically didn't come out till later when we actually had the first preliminary hearing, and one of the sheriff officers was put on the witness stand, and he is the one that stated at that particular point in time that they tested everything for meth. And the attorney that I had, Melody, she called him on that and said, well, nothing in the reports allude to that. And that's true. There was nothing in the reports that mentioned meth at all. But
now, let me ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
So, would you say that these officers, whoever they were, it was some kind of a SWAT team, and there were individuals on that team who were just kind of stand-ins, poseurs? I know there was Mr. Temecula on that SWAT team, the bodybuilder, right?
2012, yep.
Okay, so did these people, the ones who were questioning you, did they seem to have actual knowledge of anything? It seems like their line of questioning suggests that they knew something about their job, right?
I'm not sure exactly where you're going with that, but I would say that, all I know is they felt like they had the right to ransack the house, to go and look through anything and everything. And, what it comes down to is I firmly believe that they didn't have anything, so they weren't content with that because they had already made a big deal out of coming into the home. And
right.
So satisfied, so they were determined to find something that they could pin on me and or my family that was going to make their time worth it.
Okay, so what I've learned in delving into this militarization process of America, there are grants that are given to create SWAT teams in various counties. And the SWAT teams must practice. They must do exercises in order to keep the grant money and then qualify for upgrades, more equipment, more money. And so they have to conduct these exercises, which turn out to be raids. And they have to find somebody to target, to raid. And many times they just barge into somebody's house and then they scratch their heads and say, oh, we just came to the wrong place. There is a drug den here somewhere, but it's not here. Sorry. But in your case, I think they took advantage of certain vulnerabilities that you might have had, the clinic that your wife had attended, for instance. I know another family, the husband was growing medical marijuana, permitted, totally legal. I'll put quotes around that word because that's another one of their trick words. But in any case, no matter how you cut it, it was legal. But his house was raided, and he lost his house, his marriage, he was put in jail. I mean, everything fell apart for them. Everything.
Yeah.
And so I think that they prey on people with certain vulnerabilities that give them the excuse to come in and check. And they were there, and they were checking madly, furiously all over your house, trying to make a connection. Because I learned that when they do actually get what they call a hit, a drug hit from one of their raids, then they get more money paid to them for that particular event.
I think you've nailed it. I think that is precisely it, and that was another thing that you had mentioned in that interview that I was mentioning before we came on air briefly, that you had done an interview that talked about that very thing, and I think you are spot on, that literally they had a multi-agency drill at our home, and it allowed them to qualify by submitting their paperwork and documentation to whether it be Homeland Security or Department of Justice. I don't know exactly how that works, but I can tell you I am quite convinced, because now we have a tank in Marietta that they received from Homeland Security. I have no doubt in my mind, with the level of inflation of this whole thing becoming inflated to the level that it was, we had at least 4 to 5 different agencies through there. We had Marietta Police Department, we had Gang Task Force, we had Narcotics Task Force, we had CHP, and we had sheriff as well. And, this was so out of proportion to going and searching for graffiti of a 12-year-old, which they then construed into tagging, which then carries with it connotations of gang activity, potential for guns, potential for drugs. I mean, so they can make it whatever they want by adding the equivalent to additional diagnostic codes to the initial assessment. And I have no doubt that's what they're doing.
Right, and Zach's little, child's play graffiti at age 12 gave them a window into exploitation, and inflation was the word you used, exaggeration, and it gave them, a foothold. It was like something, finding anchor, a crab, or I don't want to hurt poor animals by association, but something getting its talons in and then going, all right, where else? I need another foothold. I'm going to grab this. I'm going to grab that. And it all adds up to money, this for-profit system that we're in, where these towns, through their agencies, can enrich themselves and can look bigger and tougher, and they're not realizing. I think on some level, somebody up there in those pyramids of organization, internal organization, does realize. But America is becoming increasingly fascist and militarized and police-like, and the freedoms are going, they're just draining out, and people are taking it. And I brought up in earlier interviews with Kim, your wife, and others about this parens patriae, the legal doctrine that allows the state to possess and do as it likes with people. And this is all through the straw man, which I didn't understand at the time that I stumbled into parens patriae. But maybe they were trying to co-opt your son through his straw man, through the doctrine of parens patriae, which gave them the right to your property, which is your child. That's part of your own, life I don't know what to call it, but parents own their children. Own is kind of a word that is tainted in our culture, but nonetheless, Zach is yours. He's your son, but the state gets to take him if they can qualify you as incompetent or dangerous or a threat to him. Then this is what happens with people who the state declares to be a threat to themselves. Then the state can institutionalize you or medicate you or whatever.
Well, let me take a quick little diversionary, just in the sense that, with what you're describing, most people don't realize that, if you were to go buy a car, and let's just say you bought a car that you were able to buy free and clear that didn't have a VIN number. Let's just take the VIN number out of it. But if you own this car and then you went down to the DMV and you registered that car and you filled out the form and registered that vehicle, you just actually gave ownership to the state of your vehicle. And now you have an equitable title which allows you to have beneficial use of that car, but you now do not own it anymore. So you were kind of like, in essence, given the use of it, the benefits of it, but you're actually paying for that privilege. And that's the same thing that's happened with our children, is that we have unknowingly signed them over through a trickery, through a contract that was done, back when they were born, when the mother informed on the baby through the birth certificate and whatnot. And we didn't know this. This is a contract, but it's null and void on its face because it was not without full disclosure. It was not without a knowing, willing, and intentional judgment on the part of that person signing it. So there was not a knowing component to it. So it really is not valid. But the powers that be, so to speak, operate on what we call presumptions. That if we don't refute or rebut the presumption that they in fact have the right to our property, our children and whatnot, they assume that they do. And they are able to come in and assert that authority against our will. And most people have no clue about that. We certainly didn't, to the level that we learned. We were delving into some of this kind of information maybe a couple years sporadically prior to this incident, but not to a level that we really fully grasped it because we didn't have the motivation to understand it. We didn't really have a real life experience that was putting us in the middle of having to really test what all this was about. But that the parents patriae that you've so eloquently described and discussed in other interviews, I mean, that was something that was a huge eye-opener to Kim and I, to find out that that the police could just come in and, take your child out of the school. Zachary was taken from his school at one point in ankle chains and handcuffs. All because we didn't call and report to the probation department that, we were going to continue to report on our son every time we took him any place. We decided we weren't going to do that anymore. And we negated a particular quote-unquote contract that we had signed under duress against our will, but it was only to get him out of their clutches. But anyways, I know I'm getting a little bit diverted here, but I just wanted to emphasize the fact that, there's a lot of things that we didn't know until we had to learn it. And
right. And to get back to the school situation, what I've learned is when parents sign up their children for public school, they're really allowing the state access to the child's physical, human, living, breathing, warm body through the straw man of the child, which the parent gives over by signing the kid up for school. And school, public school, is a government benefit. And when you sign children up and you receive benefits, then anything that goes with those benefits is part of the package, and you really don't have much recourse for instance, vaccinations. The schools are now installing actual medical clinics.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, and they're going to have nurse practitioners, and the nurse practitioners are going to administer shots and drugs and all kinds of stuff to children. And it's the right of the state through the straw man of the child, signed over and signed for by the unwitting parent. So the benefits, I mean, if you want benefits, then you have to take what comes with the benefits. So in your case, I'm imagining that having signed your son up for public school, if they wanted to, they could put him in shackles and drag him out because it was for his own good as determined by the state.
Well, and on that same note, his birth certificate had to be presented to show who he was so that they had access to knowing exactly what they were dealing with, just like you present your birth certificate when you go get a driver's license. And they are, in essence, creating a franchise with the name of the corporate person in all capital letters that you are now operating under, and that franchise is owned by the state. So we're operating under a franchise name that they have ownership of, and we just have the beneficial use of. And some of those benefits are going to jail if you don't
right.
want.
Now, just let me stop you for a minute. When you say his birth certificate had to be shown, that was upon signing him up for school, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so that was in the beginning. And that puts him on the record. It puts the straw man on the record and your consent to have your warm-bodied child connected to his straw man and thereby, accessible to the state in any way they deem appropriate.
We had no idea what all that was amounting to, and the marriage license itself really, it started even with a marriage license between Kim and I. We basically are in a three-party relationship with a marriage license between Kim and I and the state. So, we've got an unwanted member as part of our matrimonial license that we're in the process of evaluating those things to correct the record, so to speak.
Yeah, there's this hidden triangulation that nobody really knows about. And it's so much part of our convention and culture that we don't question it. So the triangulation is you, your wife, and the state are part of your marriage. And some people do talk and write about this on the internet. I mean, I've run into people who never felt any need to be officially married because why do we need a marriage license? Why do we need the state breathing down our necks all the time?
I agree with that. We didn't know.
Yeah.
Didn't know. And I don't think it's necessary at all. I mean, it's between our maker and us. A license by a governing agency is absolutely not necessary. But, it becomes tradition. It becomes the norm, and it becomes what people just socially accept and start just parroting that this is what you do when you get to this point in life and you do this and you do that and you get your driver's license and you get your marriage license and you register your child and you do all these different things, Right.
So I wanted to recap for people who may not be aware of this in these terms exactly, that when a baby is born and the mother fills out the long-form birth certificate on which she is actually called an informant, the informant giving the information, that long-form birth certificate is filed by the hospital with the county, and then several days later, the short-form birth certificate is issued, and that has the franchise, legal, straw man, fiction self on it. And that's the one they send to the parents who proudly show it everywhere without understanding that that is not a certificate of live birth at all. It's an incorporation document.
That's right. Yeah. And, there's some, technicalities where, we realize that, as a living, breathing man and woman, we are supposed to be given what we call an appellation, which is what we go by, which is the basically the appellation is what our mother would have given us for people to call us by, as opposed to a name. Name has become a socially accepted term, but it's part of just the general speak. It's not, as a legalese term, name actually applies to something that's non-living, to a thing, a corporation. And so, anyways, that's just an aside.
Well, there seem to be degrees of this that, you could learn forever. But I want to fast forward now to recent events. And August of this year, I know that you stood up in court and you started to present this particular angle of operation to the court in Riverside, and they didn't like it at all.
That is correct.
This business of contracting.
Yes. Basically, at one point when I had an attorney, I decided, once I got to a point of knowledge and understanding and realized exactly how this system really works, it took a while for me and Kim to become educated enough to where I could basically, speak in terms of knowing about what this information and how it applies to our lives and to our standing. And I knew that having an attorney actually made me powerless. And so I actually dismissed my attorney at one point and was going to handle things all on my own. And the court, does not allow that. The court is an administrative court. It's a commercial court. It's all about commerce, has nothing to do with judicial and justice and the things that we think about when we see movies and TV shows about court and law. But essentially, they must have a representative of a corporate nature that they are actually conducting business with in that courtroom. And I was not willing to take one of those positions. And so I was there to handle the matter, which, the claim or the charges against the name David Dortch, those charges were to the name that was in all capital letters, not to the appellation that my mom gave me on, my long form birth certificate. And so...
Well, David, can you just clarify a little bit more? Because my brain is struggling with this.
Sure.
What does it mean that a court is commercial and not about justice? I mean, I know that you don't get justice out of it, but it's not a judicial whatever entity. It is about commerce. Can you please explain that?
I'll make it as brief as I can. Essentially, the law that this nation was founded upon by the founding fathers, so to speak, was based on principles of natural law that are principles that have been discovered over, thousands and thousands of years of what it takes to live harmoniously with one another. And it's been distilled down to basic principles of, do no harm to another, don't encroach on their personal space or their property, don't take something from them that doesn't belong to you, don't steal, don't kill. I mean, those basic tenets of, common sense. And then also to keep your word in all that you do. So if you contract or have an agreement with somebody, you keep your word. Your word is your bond, and a handshake should be worth it. What we have, the type of system that we're under now, is not law. It's totally discretionary, which means that we have legislators, which in what we're discovering are pretty much synonymous with the Pharisees and the Sadducees of biblical speak, if that's where some people want to go. But it's no different than these law-minded individuals who think that everything is about keeping the word of man versus keeping the word of their maker. And so in this particular guise, we're under legislative statutes and codes which are not lawful at all, because they can be changed at the whim of anybody with a pen in their hand and the power of legislation behind them. And so the system that we're under right now is centered around corporate commerce, around non-lawfulness, but they call it legalese. And I'm not sure if I'm getting to the point here properly, but in essence, the courts that we're dealing with here, Sophia, are commercial in nature, in that the judge who is presiding over the case, for instance, that judge is there not as a living man or a woman, but when they're sitting on the bench, they are in fact a corporation. And they can only do business with another like-kind entity, which would be another corporation. And so if I'm there as me, and the appellation David Dortch, not the uppercase, all capital name fiction or corporate person in all capital letters, they can't have that because they cannot do business with me. They could not do any contracting. There could be no business to be had. So they must get me to accept the role of the corporate fiction or the corporate person so that they can contract and do business. And they get very, very perturbed and irate when somebody decides to step out of their role as the corporate person and try to assert themselves as a living, breathing, flesh and blood human, or a flesh and blood man or woman. And so that's essentially where it comes down to, is that I was asserting my standing as a flesh and blood man, and they would not have it. They didn't explain that in those terms, but I know that to be true, that they can't do business with somebody in that particular situation. And so they were trying to force me into one of their particular slots, which would be either accepting an attorney, and that way I would be represented, as opposed to me presenting myself as the living man all on my own. I don't want to be represented, but they wanted me to be represented by somebody else, as though I am not capable of handling things on my own, as though I'm incompetent, as though I'm non-living. And the other option would have been pro se or pro per. Well, those particular options would have meant that I would have been assuming the position as an attorney, representing myself. That doesn't work either, because I would have still been representing me as though I'm not the living, breathing man. And I wouldn't take any of those positions. So what the court decided to do at the threat of jail was to appoint an attorney to me when I tried to make the stance on my own. And so they, against my will, against my consent, appointed a public defender. And, so at that point, when they appointed the public defender, then they could basically allow this particular individual to speak on my behalf. They could keep me quiet and not allow me to get anything onto the record.
Okay, so what you've told me, and now it's one of these things that's so unnatural that my head doesn't know how to grasp it. So you're really saying that as a corporate entity, everybody in that court, the bailiff, everyone, the judge, the clerk, the plaintiff, the defendant, they're all corporations, all together in a box.
Yes.
And nobody is allowed in that box unless they have that status stamped all over them.
That is correct.
And it's like the court has a particular kind of tinted glasses, and when they look through those glasses, they have to see you as the corporation. If you're the wrong creature and you're not colored in the color they need you to be, you can't even be there.
That is a very excellent explanation. I don't know how many listeners have ever seen the movie called The Truman Show with Jim Carrey, but that's an excellent example of this very thing. He's the true man, and he was in essence, in a nutshell, he was basically raised on a TV set, and he all of his life didn't realize that he was actually he was actually living the life, playing a role on a stage that all the other players in his life were actually paid actors. And he was the only one that didn't realize that he was actually an actor on a set. And, at some point he ends up waking up to the fact that he is living a life that is fake, and he has to make a decision to get off the set. And, he goes through some struggles to make that move, but ultimately that ends up being what he has to do. And that's really analogous to what we're all looking at. There's a line between accepting a world that has been created for us, that's created by man who wants to be like God, and then there's the world of realizing that, opening our eyes to that particular scenario, and realizing that we have rights that have been given to us by our Creator that precede and predate any type of man-made institutions or any man-made, regulations and rules and statutes and codes. And we don't have any allegiance to or obligation to man-made codes unless we agree to it. It's all by consent.
Right. So we're all ambling around a set, to use the Truman Show term. Well, it's a stage set. It can be a movie set, anything you want. We're ambling around it, and we're in this web, this net of contracts that we don't even perceive. We can't perceive them. And we need to be able to put on the same glasses that the court has and see these things. And once you understand how to identify them, then you can separate yourself tactically and strategically. You can even begin to mentally do that from this web that's around you, that has you, your feet are caught in it, and everything that is in it is turning you, is knocking you over, seriously. Because the whole thing is designed to knock you over, knock you about, such that you don't know what's happening, and you go to their experts with their degrees and their experience and qualifications and licenses, and you say, help me, I can't do this, I can't navigate, what do I need to do now? And you pay them money. And I was looking at the commerce when you started to talk as, okay, so they're there to make money, is that it? Is it all about money? But it isn't really. It's a net thrown around the real world that is very, very, very cleverly designed and very sticky and ubiquitous. It is absolutely everywhere.
Yes, it is. It's everywhere. And, the ones that are in the system that are supposed to be helping us, if they're all part of the system, then even, most individuals have no clue. I do firmly believe that most men and women are truly good-hearted and really want to do benevolent things. I mean, there are obviously some real evil and sick and twisted individuals, but I do believe that that's a small portion relative to the overall total, that most men and women want to do what's right, and they want to live a peaceful life, and they want to allow others to do the same thing. So, they get their education, they get their indoctrination, and they basically do the bidding for this system unbeknownst to themselves. And that is part of what actually keeps us in the system, is because everybody has been so well programmed that they themselves are keeping everyone else in the system, thinking that they're helping. So, it's pretty convoluted.
When you said that most human beings are well-meaning, I'm going to ask you, David, to comment, and then I want to ask you a little bit about your own physical, emotional experience of what you've been through. I think it was somebody, Milham, who was giving those electrode experiments.
Milgram?
Doing those.
Yeah.
Who was it?
The Milgram experiment.
Milgram. Okay, I'm going to type that in. I don't know Milgram experiment. Obedience experiment. Milgram, right. So that was an experiment in obedience to authority figures, and it's part of social psych. It was done at Yale by psychologist Stanley Milgram. And this was the test of whether people would obey orders to administer increasing levels of voltage on experimental subjects in another room, shocking them. And the degree to which these well-meaning people that you've referred to were willing to just dose poor, helpless people in another room with electrical current was really wild.
Well, I guess...
But it was fake. I have to say it was all fake.
It was fake. My comment to that, Sophia, is that, there's a certain level of righteousness that I don't, I happen to be a believer in my Creator, and, I'm no Bible thumper, but I do believe that I am created by my divine Creator, and that these natural law principles that I was speaking of earlier, that they are no less than laws of physics that relate to our morality. In other words, there's a reaction to every event. There's a cause and an effect. And if we treat others with disrespect and with evil means, those things are going to create chaos and disharmony, and there's no possible way that we're going to live and thrive in peace and love. But if we treat others with those principles, and we adhere to those principles, not only in just how we treat others, but how we think. I mean, because how we think in our own minds affects everything else that we do. So if we don't have some of these basic tenets, these principles, and if there's not a true motive behind what we do, then it's very easy to fall prey to making morally relative type decisions where we think, well, if it feels good, do it. And, that's a very dangerous prospect. We might claim to be peace-loving, but if we don't have a barometer by which we can measure and compare, we've got to have some way of assessing critical thinking in a moral sense. Otherwise, we can fall prey to that very type of authoritarianism, and we just do what we're told.
So when they had you chained to the patio furniture, and when they were conducting the raid, and they were upstairs in your bedroom for all those hours, and Kim wasn't there, and they had taken Zach and all that, what was in your head? What was going through your head? And your mind and your being and your emotions?
That was a very, very traumatic time. I can tell you that when you're in a position where you feel utterly helpless, you feel like someone is forcing themselves on you in a way that you cannot, you can't physically respond to, you can't emotionally respond to and make it better. There's nothing that at that moment that you can really do to remedy the situation. You are totally at their whim. And that's a very helpless position to be in. And, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But I can tell you that, it's been the proverbial 2x4 to the side of the head event for me and my family, because we've been forced to wake up to a lot of the things that we're speaking of here to a degree that I don't know that, short of this experience, we're pretty well studied and we're pretty well motivated to learn truth in every way, shape, and form. But, the component of time, I don't know that we would have learned the things that we've had to learn anywhere close to in the condensed amount of time that we've been able to. And, so there's been a double-edged sword component here, that there's been a blessing despite all the negativity, despite this whole horrific event that my family has been dealing with. There's been some pluses. I mean, one of them is that I've met you. I wouldn't trade all the good things. I wouldn't trade those to have the negative thing go away at this point. So, but yes, back to that event, it was very traumatizing. When it was at the end of that day, Sophia, when, at 5:30, when everybody left the house, ultimately, and my son was gone, they'd taken him from us, and they ended up having him incarcerated for 4 days from that point. So when they left and my daughter's boyfriend left, it was just my daughter and I there at the house. Kim hadn't come home yet. And I felt like I needed to just ball up in a corner, and it was just, I felt very helpless. I felt very weak. I felt like there was no control. I had no control over my life at that moment, and it was a very helpless feeling. Very helpless.
Well, I can imagine that you have tons of what they call PTSD, especially, we haven't even gotten into them throwing you to the ground in August and putting you in jail and trying to force you to get a psych evaluation. But somewhere, if you want to call it hitting bottom, and you've done that many times now in this ordeal, is there anything that, I don't know, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but do you feel any kind of release where you feel that there's something bigger that's holding you and taking you through this, and there's a reason for it, and that it isn't all on your head, that you have to figure out every step of this,
Yes, I do feel that way. Personally, there's too many to recite here, but we've had so many miracles that are nothing short of just miraculous things that have happened that have been really, really uplifting and have been, confirming that we're on the right path. Our life is nothing short of what our objective. I don't do things just to increase and enhance my own comfort level in this world. I do it because I want to improve the success and the long-term future of my offspring, my progeny, and my kids and my grandkids and great-grandkids. I'm looking to the future thinking, these kids are the future. And if I can't leave something better than the way it is now, if I can't lift my head up from the herd and quit looking down at the ground and look up and around and see what's going on around me so I can see which direction, things are coming from and which direction we need to try to go. I'm guilty of handing over, a future of slavery to my kids and the rest of my generations. And, everything that my forebears worked hard for to get me to where I am right now would completely fall by the wayside if I don't wake up and if I don't move forward. So, yes, I feel very strongly that we have, forces unseen and seen that have been assisting us. And it's been just phenomenal. It's been a roller coaster ride for sure. But, the negatives have been, in my mind, have been overshadowed by a lot of incredible positive things. Like I said, just we've met some incredible souls, individuals who have just, come out of the woodwork. And here's some of our own very family members that, we've, known all of our lives have been distant and removed because they don't know how to deal with these kind of issues, and it's very uncomfortable. And I don't overly fault them. I just have to accept it for what it is, and let them at some point hope that they figure it out and that they have the determination, self-determination to inquire for themselves, because it's an individual thing for each and every one of us. There's nothing, despite our experience, we want to help improve things for the future, but we can't do anything for anybody ultimately. Everybody is going to have to make the decision on an individual basis for where they stand in relation to this whole structure that we are a part of. And they can, choose to ignore it and continue to watch their soap operas and their television programs and their sporting events and continue to forget or pretend that everything's, peachy. We can't do that. We can't do that.
Well, I know, David, I'm listening to you talk, and then I'm thinking, well, if he says he feels strong and there's something more positive and all this, people will say, oh, good, I don't have to worry about him. Well, I want people to put themselves in your shoes, and we're going to start talking now about what happened in August. But the fact that you've gone through cycle after cycle of this, and there has been more and more fabrication, charges, accusations, which is what they absolutely boil down to being, it's unrelenting. And you've become somehow the object of prey of this very predatory system that is staffed with people who either have no regard for humanity or who have some stake in it, whether it's financial reward or some kind of, moving up in the chain of control. I don't know what it is. Or if they're just purely evil, satanic is another word for it. Mm-hmm. I can't begin to describe what goes on in these people's minds, that they are cut off from themselves, from the type of self that you are, for instance. So you have been subjected to a repetition of cruelty, of, over-the-top cruelty through a system and through individuals in that system. So that's what I want people to appreciate, that you're going through it. We're just hearing about it.
Mm-hmm. Anybody could be subjected to the situation that me and my family have been subjected to, and that's the sobering part, is that, I don't wish this situation on anybody, but I do think that the bright side, that's the way we choose to look at it that way, but we also kind of have to, because, we have to continue on in life. We can't stay focused on the components that appear to be dragging us down and that we're having to fight against. We have to look at this whole event is just part of our life right now. It's not just this isolated event that we're able to just kind of, put aside and live life and then deal with the event. It's ongoing. It's 24/7. It's unresolved. It's constant. So, that being said, we have to incorporate into our life those events and how we're going to deal with them and move forward, and in a very, very constructive way to get out of this situation, but to also take from it what we can and make things better from this point forward. So I feel for anybody that is hiding and burying their head in relation to issues like this, because, again, it's happening. We've looked at these kind of things, and it's been stated statistically that approximately, 100 of these things are going on at different times and places throughout the United States at any one time. These kind of raids are going on. This is happening everywhere. We just happen to be one of the more recent locations where they've conducted one of these drills, but it's happening everywhere. And so is it just a matter of, statistically speaking, when is your number going to come up?
Right, in your area.
That's correct.
And these raids are paid for with these corporate grants. They're all grants that are, contracts are written for them, applications are made, if you can believe it, by sheriff's departments and police departments, and the officials in different agencies, and those applications are submitted through FEMA and DHS, and government money is paid out to conduct events, exercises of the kind that happened to you.
Yes.
And then people get trapped, and then then the experiment is, all right, so now what can we do, and what can we do now, and let's up it, let's make it even more I don't know. I don't even know a word for it. It's painful on your end, but serious. Let's add to it. Let's compound it. And that's what they've done. Now you were knocked to the ground. You went to work on August, whatever it was, and a bunch of these people were lying in wait for you. There was a man posing as an air conditioner repairman or something, and he asked you a question and then, jumped on your back.
Well, let me just go back a little ways real quick. What I'll say is, for one, the question you asked earlier about what are my thoughts and my emotional perspective on this whole thing. And I will say that, we, between Kim and myself, but mostly Kim, and a few interviews with myself included, but she's been an advocate for our family and for me at times when I wasn't available to talk. And so between us, we've done a number of different interviews, and we've gotten an overwhelming amount of, emotional and some financial support, which has been, nothing short of amazing in my book. We've had, responses from people all over the world relating to some of these things. And, people from other countries, they see a lot of what's going on here that we don't see right in the middle of it. But it's very encouraging for me to get responses and support from others who are, just giving the thumbs up to what we're, the fact that we're moving forward despite everything that we're being confronted with. But I just want to say that kind of outpouring of response has been tremendous. And so going back to when I was talking earlier about having had a public defender assigned to me, it became very, very quickly clear to me, Sophia, that this public defender was starting to make, I did not accept the appointment of this public defender. I refused to contract with him. In other words, when he was assigned to me, I said, I do not accept this appointment. I do not accept and consent to anything that you want to try to do on behalf of this court. And despite that, the judge still said he is your attorney and he is going to be representing you. So I knew right there that I was getting bullied hugely. And so I was going to have to make some very, very serious decisions. On August 27th, actually the 26th, the night before that, the hearing of the 27th of August, Kim and I were, basically, we had a little discussion in the evening time, and pretty much it became unanimous that she said, that she felt strongly that, I needed to go ahead and dismiss this case on my own. And I had already been contemplating that in my own mind, but I hadn't really discussed it with her. And, I was very, very relieved, in fact, when she gave me those words, because it gave me the consent and it gave me the backing and the strength that I needed to act. And at that point, so on the 27th, I had a chance to get up and speak before the judge. And at that point, I demanded to see a contract. I said, this is all corporate commercial court. I said, this is nothing more than commerce. One corporation has to do business with another corporation. I am not a corporation. I'm a living man. And I demand that any contracts that exist be produced here and now. A contract between myself and this Mr. Coleman, the public defender. I demand a contract be produced between me and this court, because if I am a man of free will choice, as everyone presumes that they are in this country, they think that they all have freedoms and they have the freedom of choice. And I said, if I am a man of free will choice, which I am, I wouldn't knowingly, willingly, and intentionally sign up for this kind of abuse. So if I am being subjected to something against my will, then there must certainly be some form of contract that I have somehow agreed to be subjected to this. So I demand it be produced into evidence right now. And the judge was quiet, and she didn't even make any intent towards doing anything and acknowledging anything that I said. And then I also discussed the fact that, nothing since we've been in any court, which now we've counted has been pretty much about 30 times we've been into different court hearings. And not one single thing, Sophia, I would say not one single motion, nothing has been granted in favor of me or my attorney. So, it's been very, very obviously overhanded. They've been extremely forceful in their tactics, and they're not following any due process. They're not following their own codes and their own rules and regulations. So at that point, it was very clear to me that I had to take matters into my own hands. And at that point, I said, no contract, no business. There is nothing here further to be done in this court because without a contract, we cannot continue. And so at that point, I dismissed the case with prejudice, got up and walked out of the courtroom, and Kim followed behind me. And lo and behold, I guess they sat around for a few minutes. This was just as per response from some of those that waited around afterwards, including Melody, my attorney, at that time. And they ended up sending a bunch of the bailiffs out into the parking lot to look for me. And we had already gone, and then they issued a bench warrant. And then on September 1st, that's the event you were talking about, I went to work. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't trying to do anything strange, but I went to work. I had Kim take me because throughout this whole event, I felt very unsafe driving around, traveling around, so to speak. I have not felt safe. I have not felt comfortable. So she's been taking me to work a lot just because of, I guess that's part of the PTSD that I'm having to deal with. But anyway, she dropped me off, and literally I was walking up to the back door of my office, and one of my employees had pulled up at the same time and was sitting in his truck. As I walk up to the back door, this guy gets out of a truck, and he's in plain clothes, and he says, "Excuse me, sir." And I was literally just at the back door, had just started to unlock it. And he said, "Are you the one that had questions about flooring?" As in a floor guy. And I said, "No." And he goes, "Are you sure you didn't have questions about flooring?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he goes, "Are you sure?" And he kept pressing the issue, and I found that very, very bizarre. And then he started kind of arching. Instead of taking a straight path to me, he started almost kind of running toward me, which was very, very strange, and it totally, made me kind of panic. So I opened the back door, and I'm like, this guy, something's not right. And he, thinking I might be mugged or whatever the case might be. But he started kind of looping a little bit, and in retrospect, I realized that what he was doing was he was trying to get my attention to look more to one side, and I went ahead and was trying to open the back door to the office, and about that time, he arrived to the back door, and a couple other officers that I didn't see kind of hit me from the side, and basically they grabbed me, pulled me out of the doorway, and slammed me to the ground. And so this was part of an undercover sting type operation where they used this guy as a decoy to try to get me off guard and to acquiesce to something that was not what it appeared to be. And so it was a sting operation designed to try to get me. In retrospect, I believe it was designed to try to get me to respond in a way that would allow them to use force against me. Because, if they had a true bench warrant, there's nothing to have prevented them from sending regular officers in regular marked cars with uniforms to show up either at my house or at my work and just wait there. They could have just confronted me right then and there and said, "We have a warrant for your arrest." And that would have been really, really simple, but they tried to trick me and they tried to, do this undercover type thing, which, was basically designed to do exactly what it did. They, ended up hitting me from the side. They threw me to the ground. They claimed that I resisted arrest, that I tried to fight them. They claimed in a preliminary hearing related to this whole event that we had on the 15th of October, the officers that spoke claimed that I threw them off of me twice. And in all, there were about 5 to 6 officers at any one point in time in and around me. And, they claimed that they were injured. They claimed that they had scratches and bruises and this and that from, and that I slammed the door on one guy's arm and hurt his elbow. I mean, they claim things that I would have had to have been Superman to have accomplished. Yeah.
Right, against many of them. Now, I want to ask you this. Didn't they give themselves a name, some kind of fugitive tactical team?
Yes, I'm not sure I can give you the exact name, but it was a fugitive apprehension force or task force or something that my attorney Melody has done a little research into, and it turns out they are likely, as she determined, they were likely just a bounty hunters out of Banning, Riverside County, but Banning, they were requested by the sheriff's department, by the prosecution, and they were probably deputized specifically for that event.
But let me just suggest here that that's another exercise that pays money.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, so they were paid by federal grant to apprehend you in this way, which gives them reason to establish such a team of thugs and keep them in business.
Yes. Yeah, it becomes really clear when you see how the whole system is set up. You know, talking to the average Joe about something like this, they just think it's part of, procedure. And it's very simple and straightforward that they needed to have this or that. But, that's looking through some sort of rose-colored glasses as well, because the reality of it is that nobody does anything for free, and it's all about the money. And there are, like you said, there are tons of different grant-type programs that if they don't conduct these drills, if they don't conduct these particular types of raids and involve the paperwork that it takes to support whatever they did, that they can then submit to, like I said, the Department of Justice and or through Homeland Security, then they don't get the grant money. So they have to go through these things, and as the order followers that they are, they give orders to their own, but they're also following orders themselves to adhere to the criteria necessary to get the grants.
Right, and it keeps them in business. And when I say business, I mean it keeps things going. It keeps the ball rolling. Now, I want to point out here the assumption, the presumption, the supposition that for every David Dortch they have to catch, oh so badly, there are all kinds of other people all over the place that are just as bad that they aren't catching. So each time an exercise takes place and they have an apprehension at the end of it, then that represents, here's that word again, lots of other potentialities that they could go after, that they could be going after if only they had the money and the manpower.
Oh, yes.
So, I was thinking about how, remember when you get the rebate on a product, a mail-in rebate? In the old days, they used to send you a check. You bought such and such, and there was a mail-in rebate, and you got a little check. And sometimes, well, most of the time, those things are very, very hard to spot. They look like junk mail, and you end up throwing them away. And then you realize, oh, there went my rebate, that piece of junk that I threw away, but it wasn't junk. So now what they're doing, they're giving you a plastic credit card, and it has the rebate money on it. And all you have to do is activate it and go into any store and spend it. So if your rebate is $50, you will simply spend $50 on that, use the card for it, and it's as good as money. But I figured out why they're doing this. Because each of these credit cards is listed as a demand deposit account on the bank's ledgers. It's the same as a checking account. So when they issue a little rebate card to you, a plastic card, and it works just like a credit card, let's say it's $50 for the tires you just bought. There's been a tire special going. Michelin and 3 other brands of tires, Goodrich, they're all doing this special, and it ended at the end of September. And they issue credit cards for the rebate. So then what that does, the bank that stands behind that particular credit card gets to lend 10 times that amount because it's documented as a deposit on the bank's ledgers. Let's say, for every There are 100,000 people who buy Goodrich, Michelin, and Dunlop tires in the month of September, and they all get a $50 rebate or $70 or whatever it is. Then the bank that's issued all these cards gets to write down 70 times 100,000 and lend 10 times that on the fraudulent practice of using people's corporate fictions. And then having lent all that money, because they go out and they lend millions of dollars on our names, they get paid interest. So they're making, a few million on these credit cards that are rebates, that a simple check that they sent you that you've deposited in your account would never bring them.
Yeah, that was a great explanation, Sofia. You've got a great way of articulating that. Yeah, that's very, very accurate. And that's what's happening in the mortgage industry and in so many other areas, just based on, our signature. We give the authority, we grant the authority for them to use that signature by handing them a piece of paper with our signature on it. And they monetize that the same way.
That's right. And so these TAC teams that they put together and they conduct one bogus, exercise with, and it results in a hit, a catch, they get to present this potential situation in a multiplied form that's out there, and they need this much more money because then they could have this many more apprehensions and hits. And it's all this same, absolute bogus, fraudulent concept that's painting a reality. And the thing is, it's shaping the public mind all the time because then they get to report on it as real. And that has happened to you in that Murrieta Patch, that online paper. They've written all kinds of terrible things about you. And
yeah, let me read you a quick little quote from a book that I find interesting in light of what you're stating. It says, "The commercial interests pay the government pays the military works to protect the government and the commercial interests." So it's just that revolving loop that, these programs are there to continually expand this very, very type of behavior, and once they expand and hire more employees and more workers, then there's a bigger machine to have to support. So they have to do more raids and more of the same thing to keep the machine alive.
it is pretty mind-boggling because the raids are being done on the cousins and next-door neighbors and extended family of the very people taking the orders and doing the raids.
Exactly.
And so when is that all going to dovetail? That's what I'd like to know. Like, who's ever going to be left? If this system just expands and expands and expands, who's left to do all this on?
Well, one of the things that we've seen, too, is that, some of the fastest-growing industries right now are the jail industry, the system of the jails. And, they're building facilities. They're going to be expanding the one here locally. That's big business. That's got to be one of the biggest industries here in this valley is the courts and the jail, and then all the peripheral cogs in the wheel that are related to that, such as social services, probation, law enforcement, more attorneys, more jails, more juvenile centers, detention centers, and it just gets more and more and more because next thing you know, there's mandates for Section 8 housing, which happens to bring in more potential for drugs and prostitution, which then means more law enforcement, which means more potential for all the rest of it again. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. The security industry, private security masquerading as police. These security firms are private organizations, and, they're for profit. So, the guy that says he wants to be a police officer to work for the people and to do the good of the people, that's baloney. Once this guy takes his office, he's going to be told what he's got to do to keep his job. And if he wants to keep his job, he's going to do what he's told. It doesn't matter what he thinks he wants to do.
Yeah. I have been looking into physician abuse, and yeah, we don't like doctors because they're not treating us effectively, but Oh my gosh, I just put a piece up on my blog and I'm going to be adding to it. But what they have to go through, the way that they're treated in medical school, and then once they're in a practice, whether it's part of a medical group or a hospital, they're just made to function like, fast running treadmills, and they have to process patients in 10 minutes.
It's pretty sick. It really is. As a healthcare provider myself, I feel very fortunate to be in an area that isn't so highly regulated to the degree that some other healthcare professions are, and that I have a little more autonomy to some regard. But there's potential legislation on the books to have optometrists administering vaccinations. I would never do that. I would never do that. But they might start to mandate that at some level, and that's where the rubber hits the road, and we're all going to become confronted with a position in this as our role in this man-made construct of a world that we live in that really is in essence a parallel world, because we have the option to step out of it, but it takes some effort, some work to figure out what those steps are. It's much easier to just put our head down and keep the coat on of the corporate person and to pretend that we are the actor on the set and just do what we're told. There's a lot less resistance from others to go along and to get along. But that's not in the best interest of our fellow man and woman. And just because it's the majority perspective does not make it right. Kim was confronted with those very, very difficult choices in her profession as a behavioral psychiatric nurse. I mean, she practiced in that profession for 20 plus years, and she voiced to me on numerous occasions her discontent with how the system was being run and the things that she was observing, doctors getting kickbacks on medications and changing the patient on a medication simply because they got more incentive from the drug company, not because it was for the patient's best good to swap to this medication when they were actually doing pretty well and on an adjusted dose that seemed to be managing them properly, but they would be swapped to something for the sake of the profit. And and oftentimes meds given against a person's will. That is abuse. And if we don't see it for that, then we're just putting our head down willfully.
Well, we have two things working against us. We have the fact that we submitted ourselves to the care of what we imagine to be a higher authority and more expert than we are. So that's the straw man level of this. And the second is, many people believe that they're sick and they need this, and this patented chemical compound is going to make them better. It's the only thing available to make them better. Otherwise, they'll get sicker. And I want to draw people's attention to something I posted on my blog page, which is accessible by hitting the blog tab on my website, where I hope you are if you're listening to this, but also Sofia, smallstorm.com, Sofia with an F. It is Ty Bollinger's cancer series, his new cancer series. There are 9 episodes, very, very lengthy and detailed, and I've posted episode 1, which is on YouTube. You've got to see this. It's very interesting.
Kim said,
but anyway,
great, but I haven't seen it yet, but yes.
Oh, well, you guys are you probably know a lot, but there was, for instance, like doctors will prescribe a $10,000 chemotherapy drug rather than a much, much, much cheaper one, because the kickback from a $10,000 drug is, it's impressive. They can actually get somewhere. They can start paying these medical school loans down.
Yeah, it's wrong, Sophia. I mean, I have gotten mailers from IEHP, which is Inland Empire Health Plan, and there's a vision component to that relates to the vision plan, which I no longer accept at my office. But I was getting, these brochures from IEHP that were geared toward the primary care physician, and it was showing the reimbursement rate for different types of vaccinations. And so, they're incentivizing doctors to build their practice on how to educate their staff, to approach patients, to give these vaccinations, and they get a certain dollar value for each vaccination.
And, you can't tell me that someone's not going to start to become dependent on the acceptance of these vaccinations. If they have 30 patients scheduled for the day, they're going to start to work into their business plan that I'm going to get X number of dollars on average per patient that comes through if we can give these vaccinations 1, 2, and 3.
Well, what vaccinations would those be if you're an optometrist?
I guess it would probably be some of the ones that are, some of it might even be not just the ones that are for the infants, like my son got when he was 15 months old. He got the, can you remember what they were doing? The MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, a number of other ones, but also even some of the flu vaccinations, the things that you see advertised at Rite Aid. We're talking the basic things.
Yeah, Rite Aid and CVS. So you would just be another dispensary.
Correct. But I think they're trying to increase the number of ancillary personnel that can administer these things, which then draws the bigger question, why? Why are we wanting to make it so available to the point that everybody gets them? Is that the objective? Makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Well, I think it's convenience. I ran into these two young children. Well, I call them children. Excuse me. They weren't. They were teenagers. But to me, they looked like children. And they were in the gym. And one of them had a Band-Aid on his arm. And I was waiting for the same machine that they were on. And I was saying hello. I'm waiting for the machine. Don't worry. Take your time. And I said to him, what's the Band-Aid for? It just popped out. He said, I just got my Gardasil shot. I said, what? And he said, I think he might have said HPV. I said, but why? I said, that's for women. You don't have a cervix.
Yeah.
And he said, well, my girlfriend got it, and I was at the doctor today, and he said, you might as well get it too.
Oh, boy.
And it's that might as well.
Oh, my goodness.
So he said, fine, and he stuck his arm out, and he took the shot. So that's what they're going to do. They're going to send you go for your, glasses exam, your vision exam every 3 years or whatever it is, and then you will say, as the optometrist, I know you won't, but let's say you were not David Dortch, but you were Joe Schmo, optometrist. You'll say, hey, you know what? We've got flu shots today. You want yours? This way you'll get it out of the way.
Well, if that was my conviction that it didn't have any negative effects, and I was certainly brainwashed to believe that it was a benefit or certainly didn't hurt, that'd be a great way to build a practice. If you got a reimbursement that was reasonable, and most people would never say no, but on the contrary, if you don't see it that way, then all of a sudden you start running into the question of, are they trying to regulate practitioners out of practice because they don't want to adhere to this particular protocol? If I said I would not be willing to give that vaccination, then it might be stipulated at some level that's going to be a mandated thing that I must give those. Just like, mandated vaccinations that are on the books here for California that are soon to be enacted. Where kids or individuals in public education and in other settings where they're around children are going to be mandated to be vaccinated, or they won't be able to keep their job or won't be able to attend school or whatever the case may be. So they're using these pressures to get people to socially conform because of these pressures. And it becomes more than social confirmation if you're actually going to lose your job over it.
Well, I think we have to get into the mindset that we shouldn't only look for jobs serving others and entities, these corporate entities that have been organized in our world. We have to be able to create our own work and offer it. And I'm sure they're going to try to crack down on that. But the fact is that as an optometrist, undoubtedly you have a license to have your practice, right? So it's within that context that they might say, well, sorry, but you've got a license. That's a privilege.
Exactly. And that is a situation that, any quote unquote professional with a corporate license is going to have to look at. I don't know if you want to cover maybe a few more of the details relating to what happened after I was arrested on September 1, but I thought maybe it might be good to just kind of briefly go through some of those things, if that's okay.
I would love to. Do you need a break of any kind?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. So let's go.
So on September 1st, after I was accosted in the back of my office, as I was taken down by this particular sting style operation, it just so happened that my employee who had pulled up was able to get his phone out, and he got most of it all on video. And fortunately, Kim had not quite pulled away from the parking lot yet, and she saw it. And because the back door had opened, two of my employees inside the business heard the back door open and heard a little commotion, and they came running to the back, and they poked their heads out and watched what happened. So all in all, I had 4 witnesses, one of them having captured 90% of it on video. And yet they still claim that I fought them, that I assaulted an officer and resisted arrest. So subsequent to that, I was hauled out of there. I was taken down to the jail. I was processed through. Then they took me from there to a local hospital to have me checked for potential injuries related to the event of that morning. I refused to give any consent or to give any information. I refused to answer their questions at the hospital. They asked me my date of birth, and I basically told them, I said, I'm here against my will and under duress, and you're gonna have to get your answers from these guys. And I pointed to the officers that were behind me. And so basically, I didn't give any information. She asked for my name. I refused to give that. She asked for my date of birth. I refused to give that. And one of the officers spoke forward and said that it was 3/1 of 1982. And I thought he was trying to catch me off guard and get me to correct him, because that is not my date of birth. And I won't specifically mention what that is, but I will say that that is not my date of birth. I was born in the 60s, and not 82. But lo and behold, when they took me back to the jail, the name and or the date of birth on my wristband actually had the date of birth that they mentioned, which was 3/1 of 82. So the whole time I was there, which was for 30 days, was literally the wrong date of birth the whole time. So it just tells you that their information, they don't really care what it is. They do the formality of just trying to fill in the boxes. They want to answer the questionnaires. They want to go through and do the grunt work, that it takes, that they're told to get to gather this information and fill in this form and blah, blah, blah. But they really don't care if it's accurate or not. They just want to do what they're told and get it done. So basically I was incarcerated at that point. Let me jump forward here. I was supposed to be basically released within 72 hours. They incarcerated me and basically gave me a no bail hold, that the judge ordered that I be held without bail. And essentially it was determined that this particular public defender that had been attached to me on the August 27th hearing, where I basically dismissed the case with prejudice, this guy proceeded to tell the judge that because I wouldn't talk to him, because I wouldn't communicate with him, and because obviously I had questioned the authority of the court by questioning their jurisdiction, and I'd also brought up the fact that we had previously requested to have a videographer there to just ensure the accuracy of the record. But they see that as, in a paranoid way, as questioning authority. And because I questioned authority, they saw me as incompetent. And so they wanted to have me undergo an incompetency evaluation by going through a psych process with a psychologist and a psychiatrist. This is supposed to be done within a very short period of time. It's supposed to be determined within, Kim has been in this psychiatric profession, and so she knows how a lot of this stuff is supposed to go. Within 72 hours, it was supposed to be determined whether I was a risk to myself or a risk to others, and or if I was, incompetent. They didn't determine any of that, but they determined that I needed to be held until I could undergo some assessments at some point by a psychiatrist and a psychologist, and that they originally, even though I was arrested on September 1st, they set the next hearing date for October 15th, which was literally 6 weeks later. They wanted to hold me in the jail for 6 weeks for these supposed evaluations. As it turns out, Melody was ultimately able, the attorney Melody, who I ended up getting to come in and replace this public defender, because this guy was basically a noose around my neck. And although I was doing my very best to do and handle things on my own without an attorney, once I was jailed and in a suit of orange, every time I was taken to the courtroom, I was held in a room that I was not able to get up and talk and be heard in any way, shape, or form. And yet the court still saw that this guy was representing me. And they would not even allow me to talk to Melody, who was, who had formerly been the criminal defense attorney, but she was also actively the attorney for the civil rights case that we brought against a lot of these agencies back in May of 2013. And so they prevented me from dealing with her. And so this guy was able to successfully get the judge to agree that I should be held for assessment and for these medical evaluations. So I'll fast forward a little bit to after I'd been in the jail for several weeks. Melody had submitted information or had given information to the court that stated that she did not want me, so she was advising me legally not to participate in any of these medical evaluations, that it was not for my best interest. Despite that, they ignored her paperwork, and on the 19th of September at about 6:30 in the morning, I was called out of my bed and basically taken against my will to a psychologist who was in a little room in the jail there. And I was taken to the psychologist. When I sat down, he asked my name. I didn't give my name. I didn't give my appellation of anything. And I said, this is going to be short because I do not consent, and this is against any legal advice. And he said, okay. And he literally got up and walked away. So I told him also, I said that the other evaluation that they have set up with a psychiatrist, I said, my response is going to be the same, so you can go ahead and convey that to him as well. I thought that was going to be a done deal, that both were going to be pretty much dealt with in that regard. Well, lo and behold, despite the fact that they said in open court, the judge, that I was going to be held for this length of time on a hold for these medical assessments, that the time period was necessary to allow these doctors enough time to write their reports. Well, it turns out that that was absolutely, utterly ridiculous, because the next hearing that I had scheduled was on October 1st, and they waited till September 30th, one day before that hearing, and at 2:30 in the morning, I was called out of bed and told to report down to the sliders, which is the main front door to the pod, or the jail room that I was in. And the deputy guard that was there, when I asked him exactly what the purpose of this visit was for, he said it was for a medical assessment. And I said, I'm not to be going before any type of medical assessments. I've already given my stance on that I will not be consenting and will not be performing any of these kind of assessments. And the deputy pretty much told me that the judge had ordered it, and that if I could either do it on my own or they were going to come in there and haul me out of there. And so, in essence, they took me to a holding room. They pulled me out and shackled me, ankle and handcuffs, and ended up putting me on a bus ultimately at about 5:30 or so in the morning. And it was pretty daunting, Sophia, because they had put me on a bus all by myself. And this bus is set up where it has little individual cages, much like a dog kennel. And I was ankle and hand shackled and put in this cage. And it was sitting there for about 15 to 20 minutes all by myself, wondering where I was going, what they were going to do with me. I had no idea. I knew the level of, potential possibility, of getting lost in the system was pretty daunting. And then finally they brought in some other inmates and filled up the bus, and then we ultimately ended up going to downtown Riverside to another big jail about 45 minutes away from Murrieta. And the purpose of that was to basically take me to where the psychiatrist was, close to his office in downtown Riverside. They had me meet with him in another room, and I basically did the same thing with him that I did with a psychologist. But all in all, I told him that I would not consent, that I was not there on my own volition, and that I would not be performing anything, and he got up and walked out. So nothing was conducted. There was no medical evaluation. No questions were answered by myself at either the visit with a psychiatrist or the psychologist. And yet, when the hearing occurred on April 1st, the very next day, that was addressed by the judge as though she had gotten reports from them, and I was magically deemed as being competent. So the whole basis for them holding me for the 1 month that they did, and they again wanted me for 6 weeks, but they held me for a full month, demanded that I go through these medical evaluations. I did not consent, did not go through the evaluations, and the time frame was ridiculous because they waited till the very last day for the last one, because of the time frame that they said that they needed was absolutely not validated, because they performed conducted a report that was submitted to the court from the day before the hearing. They did a very short hearing in the courtroom that basically deemed me as competent. It was a trial. It was a mini trial that lasted less than, maybe a minute, that deemed me competent after having sat in jail for a month, not gone through and did anything that they requested me to do. And, it basically makes a mockery of the whole thing. And it shows precisely that it was, it was done to basically put me in my spot. But additionally to that, as we were talking earlier about these grants and the money system and the monies that are being generated from this whole system, there's no doubt in my mind that they were, creating billable hours, by having me there. They were able to bill for me being there. They were able to bill for the transport back and forth. They were able to bill for the medical visits, no matter whether I participated or not. And, I'll have you know that on the way back from that Riverside, fiasco where they took me to the psychiatrist on the 30th of September. On the way back, I was talking to one of the inmates on the bus, and he informed me about a particular process called the Diesel Express, where he says oftentimes they'll take an inmate that they want to get lost in the system, and they will transport him from jail to jail and cell to cell, sometimes for days or even a week. And this inmate will be lost in the system so that they can't be located by, the courts or the family or the attorney. And, so I had grave concerns after that kind of thing could happen, very, very easily.
Well, I'm sure it could. I mean, they have pretty much full control unless there's some metaphysical miracle. But I want to suggest here that, they have elevated you now from this game of chase that they've played with you to a high level of quote-unquote danger. You're a person who mandates great degree of surveillance and handling and management. You're a high-risk entity. And so to have you incarcerated or in jail for that many days meant that, yes, they could bill somebody, it's all privatized, so somebody's making money. But because it's you and not just some petty thief or something, you're that much more, your value is that much greater in the game that they play.
Exactly. I mean, we're being traded like stocks on the stock market, and it makes me wonder, who's watching and watching the value of their stock, so to speak. So, there's no doubt there's a very intricate level of monetizing that's going on with all these different events.
Right. I've heard that prisoners are monetized, and it depends on, again, their status. If you're a super-duper high-level criminal, then you have a higher monetization than somebody who's lowly. But so it was in their interest to keep you penned up as long as they did and put a high value on your corporate strawman head, and they traded that. And I've heard that only certain judges and high-level law enforcement officers can trade these prisoner derivatives.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. One of the things that I'll kind of just divert back to for a moment is that when we filed a civil lawsuit against Marietta Police Department, Riverside County Sheriff's Department, and some other entities, that was on May 29th of 2013, which was just barely little over a month from the time that our home was raided on 4/20/2013. 13 days later, on June 12th, the police department circulated an email that somebody fortunately forwarded to me, but they circulated an email to all county and city employees of Marietta and the Valley, stating that they had been monitoring and watching my family for months, and that there were several areas of concern, but the biggest area of concern was my sovereign citizen ideology. And that was a term that I had never heard before at that time, and I certainly having never heard it, but had certainly never ascribed it to myself. And this is a term that, I have since learned that, is a term that's been coined pretty much by the FBI and CIA, and it's a term that's preferentially used to describe anyone who's doing anything that they don't like, that's challenging their authority in any way, shape, or form. And the term, sovereign and citizen is like an oxymoron of, a Christian atheist. It's like two terms that don't really mesh. A citizen is generally one that's under control of an authority, and a sovereign is one who actually has no higher authority. So they really don't coincide, but it's a term that is very inflammatory in the eyes of law enforcement. And both times that I was jailed, which was on November 1st, 2013, the first time, and then again on September 1st, 2015, both times at the initial check-in process in the jail, I was confronted by one of the deputies and asked if I was a sovereign citizen. So this is something that has been traveling with my file, despite there being no evidence of this fact, never claiming any such thing, and I've never been outspoken or on anything such as political beliefs or any other ideological perspectives, religious or otherwise. I don't even have a Facebook account. So this kind of thing is something that they pretty
Okay, I lost you.
Probably. Are you there still?
Yes, I think we had a little Skype glitch. I lost you for a second.
Yeah, I saw it briefly. But basically, it's a preferential label that, you know, as we were talking about with the monetization, it may in fact give them a bigger paycheck or payout.
Yeah, these are self-contradictory terms that are actually very confusing, and I think they're using these as tags or brands and throwing them hither and thither into public lexicon, maybe, and they're defining these in their own. They're characterizing these terms themselves, and no one's aware how self-contradicting the terms are, oxymoronic, as you mentioned, but. Anyway, so they're not real possibilities. There's no such thing apart from being in their definition, something in their handbook, you know. So it may be another kind of status that they try to attach to us so that they can, I don't know, it adds to their whole roster of accusation possibilities, charges. You know, that's another thing that I stumbled into, and your wife, Kim, helped me understand that when they charge you with something as a criminal, there's actually money, the potential of money, a payout being attached to that, and that's why it's called a charge. Mm-hmm. So there's so much of this word play involved here, and it makes it even more profoundly a fictitious scenario because we're not aware of the wordplay, we don't understand all these like for instance, there's a Jordan Maxwell YouTube clip on the I think it's on the birth certificate, and it's all redefining through almost, it's homonyms, birth, B-E-R-T-H and B-I-R-T-H. It comes out of maritime law. But I don't even know if I can believe that because it just seems, David, all too fantastic to me. Like, it can't be that they've figured out all these layers and they've got this string and that string. I mean, it's not even possible.
Yeah, it's pretty much an entangled web that we're trying to disconnect from strand by strand. You know, we're trying to figure out the pieces as we go, but a huge part of it, you know, is relating to our spirit, our mind, and our body, and that gets back to a point of DNA. And I will say this, that when I had the hearing while I was still in jail, the last one, which was October 1st, after this fiasco to the jail and about 15 hours of being shackled up, the judge at that point, after deeming me competent, despite all the things that we talked about, and nothing really having been different other than the fact that I served 30 days and that was it, but I was deemed competent, and even though I was on a no bail hold, and the judge decided that she would go ahead and set bail. And she set two different bails. She set one relating to the initial case from that arose out of the 11/1/2013 arrest, and that was $50,000. And then she set another bail for $100,000 relating to my supposed resisting arrest and assaulting an officer when I was arrested on September 1st. So it was $150,000 total. And as much as it rubs me wrong and it goes against my grain to contract again on a bail, I had to think about all the other things that were at risk by me being in that jail longer, because I seriously considered, waiting it out. But they kept putting dates into the future toward, the middle and the end of November. And when I realized about the whole incident of the Diesel Express situation, and I was already seeing other inmates that I didn't visibly see getting roughed up, but I saw the after effects that looked like they had probably just been roughed up by somebody, one of the deputies or more. Guy with blood on the back of his head that I had already seen, earlier in the day. There were a number of things that I witnessed that, really, really, were unsettling. And there were so many compartments and hallways and back rooms in this jail facility that, you could get hauled away anywhere and you would get lost very easily in the shuffle. And quite frankly, I wasn't willing to subject myself to that any further. I also had a business, to run that I had been removed from forcibly for a month, and was struggling to keep running. And thank you to the wonderful individuals that I work with, that they were able to keep the business afloat and get an associate in there to run the practice while I was gone. But I had to get back to what it took to make life work for us on a day-to-day basis, in addition to trying to handle a case. So I opted to go ahead and bail out. And so Kim posted bail for me on the 1st of October, and I got a call early in the morning on October 2nd at around 2:30 in the morning, telling me to roll up my bed and to report down to the front door of the pod that I was in. And at first I was a little caught off guard because I thought, are they getting ready to move me? Are they going to put me on a bus somewhere? Are they going to move me in the middle of the night? And when I asked if it was a release or a transfer, they said it's a release. So that, set my heart at ease at that point. Got all my stuff together and was prepared to get out. And when I got up to the front part of the jail, they always do an exit interview. And during the exit interview of the guy who was right before me, there was myself and one other guy that was going to get processed out that morning. And they told him that they were going to gather his DNA. Well, that was an issue that had occurred back in November 2013, that I refused to give DNA, and they charged me a misdemeanor as a result of that. And I told them right then and there that I was not going to be consenting to that. I was not going to be giving up part of my body. And the guy, literally, you would have thought the guy became instantly demon possessed, because he blew up in my face, and he said that he had the right to throw me down on the ground right then and there, and to take my DNA from me forcibly if that meant a blood draw. And I told him that I wasn't going to be consenting. I was not going to be giving my DNA. It didn't matter what. And he says, well, you're not leaving here tonight. And he then put me in another holding cell and pretty much told me I probably wasn't going to leave. This was early on Friday morning, the 2nd. He says, in fact, you're probably going back to your cell tonight, and you probably won't get out of here until maybe Tuesday of this next week. And, I was starting to kind of get a little bit concerned at that point, but I knew that I was not going to give over part of my biology. And it's my right to not give up part of my body and this particular statute that they rely on to try to extract DNA from inmates is unconstitutional, for one. But nonetheless, he put me in a holding tank. And here's one of the miracles that I have to relay, is that there was a phone in there that was a pay phone that typically you have to have a PIN number for, or in some cases you can make a collect call, but those can be fairly expensive. Well, I was able to get on the phone, dial 0, and even though it said it was collect, I was able to get through to Kim, because I didn't have Melody, the attorney's, number. I was able to get a hold of Kim. She answered the phone, and the time allotted for the phone call was maybe about 7 or 8 minutes. And I was able to get her on the phone. She was able to call Melody, and literally had Melody on one phone and me on the other. And even though the phone call disconnected, I was able to call her back a total of 4 or 5 different times, Sofia, from that cell, and was able to talk to Kim all the way from the house to the jail, to the front lobby, while she was on her cell phone. And it was pretty miraculous. She was able to get a hold of Melody, have Melody call the jail, and talk to the guy that was berating me. And this guy basically did about 180-degree turnaround, because even though he was in my face and threatening to accost me and he was assaulting me verbally and threatening me with battery. And as soon as he got off the phone with Melody, he came around the corner and was as polite as could be. It was very, 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 very amazing.
So what did she say to him?
She basically said to him, she confirmed what I had already told him, that, if you want to be added, I said, continue if you want to be added to my civil suit as another
defendant.
Well, as another defendant, correct, in the case. And I don't think he believed what I was saying. He didn't really believe that I had a case. She confirmed that I, in fact, had a case and that she would be adding them to it. And so out of fear and not being added, I think that was his motivation, because even though he was nice, when I went to go through the final exit interview, they still tried to get me to give the DNA again. They still tried to get me to give the swab. He said, here, I'll give it to you so you can do it. And I said, I'm not going to be doing it. And then he proceeded down the line of, well, even if it was determined that this was an absolute law that wasn't unconstitutional, if you ever came back here again, would you still not consent? And I said, absolutely. I said, this goes against my rights, period, as a living man, and I will not be consenting. I don't care if it is considered legal or not. That doesn't make it right, because it's legal, and I would not be consenting. And so suffice it to say, it was a pretty big ordeal, because they really wanted to get my DNA, and that's a huge part of what I think is going on here too. Is that, that's the code that they're wanting to access for each and every one of us. Over in Great Britain, I understand that even on routine traffic stops, they'll pull people over and do a blood draw to extract their DNA. And this is kind of where we're headed, but that's not something I'm ever going to give up willfully, ever.
Well, it is kind of, mind-blowing how systematic, and again, I use the word predatory, they are about this. There's that, you heard about the National Geographic invitation to send a saliva sample to them, and then they'll tell you about all your ancestry.
Exactly. I think that's a ruse.
That's a ruse, too. But you would think that being in their jail, they could find bits of your DNA, hairs on the floor and whatnot, don't you think?
Well, what we know is that they want you to give consent.
That's right. That's right.
And so, they're going to fight tooth and nail for that consent, because that's part of their directive and their order following, that they have to do things, at least on the surface. The appearance has to be that they're doing things by the book, even though they obviously don't fully do things by the book. But when they're dealing with you face to face, they do try to make that effort as though they're trying to do things by the book, to some extent. But I made the clarification, that this is not lawful, and that, lawfulness is not the same thing as legalness. And that, somebody could be assaulted and battered, and that is unlawful, no matter how you slice it. Just because you put a uniform on and call it legal, and say that this guy with a uniform can now go over and start hitting somebody and doing something because he has a billy club and a gun, and now it's legal for that guy to beat you, that doesn't make it lawful, ever.
Right. He has the presumed authority.
Exactly.
To do it. Now, I, on some interview, I don't even know which one it was, I used the analogy of a spider web to talk about lawful and legal. And I learned that spiders, when they weave their webs, their main, I'll just call it, I don't know what it's really called, strong lines, the foundational lines of the web that run from like the pillar over to the post, and then they weave and spin another one. They're spun from silk that is not sticky. Mm-hmm. So it's only the circular part of the web, that goes out in the bigger and bigger spirals that is sticky. So when an insect comes and lands on the web, it'll get all caught up in a little area of it, and the spider then bundles more stuff around it and eats it. But the spider only has to damage that one, repair that one little damaged section of the web, because the strong lines are not damaged at all. They're not sticky. So I relate the strong lines to lawful and the sticky interior stuff to legal.
That's great, yeah.
So the laws, what's lawful is very simple. It's straight and clean and pure, and everybody understands it, even children. But this legal stuff, there's loads of it, and it's all, unknown to us, and it's all a trap, and it's done just by and through legislation and whim, and it's the sticky stuff of the web.
Yeah, it's where we need the intermediary of the attorney, which is very similar to having the vicar of Christ or the Pope as the intermediary between, truth, so to speak, that we can't decide and we can't determine for ourselves. We need somebody else to interpret for us, and that's where it gets really sticky.
Right. So there are now these new charges leveled against you. Charges, let's put that in quotes, because there's probably payment and money attached to them, that you knocked officers down, and apparently they have falsified medical records now attesting to the harm you inflicted, right? So this is not, you're not by any means at the door getting out of all this.
No.
You're still in it.
No, I would say at this point, just to kind of summarize, I'm facing more stuff that's been stacked than ever right now. So despite the fact that more time has gone by and they really haven't made a lot of headway, the courts keep, and the prosecution, despite everything that we brought out, we have a stack, literally a stack of evidence showing where they have violated, where they have been fraudulent and falsified things, falsified records, falsified documents, falsified court hearings, the minutes. It's amazing. And yet, because they have, a court and a prosecution and public defender's office that all work in collusion, in concert with one another, Melody is definitely not one of their best friends right now, because she is an attorney. Despite the fact that she's an attorney, a barred attorney, she is, the most ethical, moral one I've ever met. And she is, I really feel like she's doing her best within the system that she's been trained within, to address these things. But, we're facing a lot of uncertainty, but at the same time, we're also seeing a picture forming, even in the last few weeks, about how this system is set up, things that I didn't even know before I went into the jail, things that I've learned even since then that have provided clarity, that is, allowing us to take some steps that we didn't know to take before. But, it still takes a lot of time, takes a lot of money to continue to move forward. Everything that we're doing is involving somebody that has a little extra piece of the puzzle, someone's time, someone's energy, someone's efforts. And so, this is a prospect that, I have faith in our fellow human and in my Creator, as that this truth that we're arriving at, and the scenario that we're confronted with, this is a rare point in history right now, to some extent, that information is accessible at the stroke of a key on a keyboard, and yet a lot of people don't want to access it. But there is information to be had, and the information is available, and I think that we are going to be responsible for accessing or not that information. And so we're doing our very best to move forward. We really appreciate the support that we've gotten from, so many individuals, and yet, we still have a ways to go. We are not in the free and clear by any stretch. We remain very positive and optimistic. This is not a one deal by them, just because, we kind of
state that, if we were to be keeping record as to who's won the last 30 hearings, pretty much it would be them. But the ultimate say is going to be the ultimate say. And, that is going to be determined at some point in the future. But I do feel very optimistic that we're going to get through this. But we really, really could appreciate, if there was any way that individuals out there listening would see it in their heart to be able to contribute. Maybe even $1 would be helpful, but whatever would be helpful to be able to help offset some of the costs that are, that we're constantly being hit with, because, it's insurmountable pretty much at this point. We've spent everything that we had, and we're pretty much month to month. This is a battle that we're fighting for us as our family, but we're also, seeing this as something that, hopefully will have some impact on the lives of others in this crazy world that we're in.
Yeah, I see you truly as pioneers, and you are the people taking the lessons head on, and then by way of these shows and interviews, sharing them with us so that we can learn too. So I urge people, please, not to just contribute $1, but something, that you can find it within yourself to part with, because you're really contributing to a path here that's going to benefit all of us the more we learn about it. And so, David, the bill that Kim posted, that was a structured payment system, right?
Yes.
Because there's no way. I mean, that's so much, $150,000.
Yeah. So the bail itself, there's a particular amount, which is usually 10% that must be paid up front, and so basically we put it on a little bit of a payment, so to speak. But essentially, we got it from 15,000, which would have been straight 10%. We got it down to 11.5 or something like that, 11,000. A little over, and we paid 5,000 the last time in 2013. Our Melody, the attorney, during that 30-day period, maybe a little bit more than 30 days, with all the paperwork and time that she spent, another $15,000 to $17,000 bill. I mean, and this we've already, we've spent pretty much everything we had, and so this isn't all about a sob story. I just want to, inform listeners as to the reality of it. It is just, unfortunately, it's a money maker for them, and it's designed to soak everybody for everything that's involved in the system. I mean, they want to drain us. They want to ruin me. They want to ruin my family. I mean, we've had some of our lowest lows during this time where, at the very beginning, there was a short period of time where it seemed very, very feasible that the family wasn't gonna get through it. I mean, when it hits you really hard at first, you don't know what you're able to get through till you get through it. And so we've gotten only stronger as a family, but they've really designed to destroy me, my family, my credibility, my practice, my finances. I mean, everything that they've been able to try to do, they have.
It's just unimaginable. I'm picturing this thing, this incorporated monster just whacking and flailing at you in every area of your life, including your soul and that whole natural, sovereign part of you. It wants to tear it to shreds. It wants to reduce you to this blubbering, helpless jelly, which it can then claim. Mm-hmm. And that jelly, we have you now. We have your DNA. We have your essence. We have your will. We have everything. And so it's a plundering of a person and everything around that person. And I'm not sure why you were selected, but I'll tell people this. I met David Dortch and his family, and there is something about you, David, that is really spectacular. You are absolutely serene. feels like you're an ascended person. I don't know. That was just the vibe I got from you. You were different from normal people. And so maybe that's why you've been able to prevail as you have and deal with this. Maybe that's why you're in its clutches, because it has picked you out as somebody that's a challenge, a real challenge to take down. You know, I don't know. I'm just babbling here, but there's something about you, and I just hope you continue to grow that thing, because you have an internal power. You have an internal beauty that I could easily see.
Well, those are kind words, Sophia. You know, and as much as, you know, I feel like a weak little baby at times, you know, it's the path that we can look back to and say, wow, we actually made it through that, and it gives you strength to continue to go in the forward direction. But I've only been able to get through it because of, you know, the strength and support that has been provided by the network of individuals, you know, and my creator for sure. You know, I do give a lot of credibility to, you know, just my faith in my fellow man and my creator, in that, you know, there's stuff that's way beyond us. This is, in my mind, this is a spiritual battle, and you know, they're trying to get to the heart and soul of each and every one of us and take ownership.
Well, I hope that they fail, and I know that there are a lot of people out there who are just shuffling along, blissfully unaware, and whose stake in this is also high, if only they knew it. And I would just urge people listening, if you know anyone who's an order taker, would you just call that to their attention, please? Because it's the order takers who enable this system to be as ruthless as it is. Mm-hmm. So anyway, David, if you would like to give us your Gmail, email address so that people can PayPal you donations, I will put that with the interview.
Sure, I would appreciate that. If you go to PayPal, the email address associated with our account is david.dortch, spelled DORTCH, @gmail.com, and it's under the heading of Dortch Legal Defense Fund.
Right. So David _Dortch, DORTCH, @gmail.com. Please donate.
It's Dortch Family Legal Defense Fund. And then it's my email address.
Right. So anyway, that's going to be there. It's going to be easily findable in the show description. And this has been quite a show, David. It's been long, 2 hours and 30 minutes. But I'm very grateful for your tremendous, you know, input here and your personal story.
Well, I'm equally grateful to you and others like you who have been willing to allow us to share some of these events that have been, you know, traumatizing, but we're also hoping to bring out the good through the negative. And, you know, it's only through venues like yours that I think it's going to really, really help spread some of the absolute truth as to what's really going on, so that we can, you know, become aware and affect change for the better.
Yeah, thank you, David. You know, I wanted to mention here that I learned through James Tracy's website, memoryholeblog.com, that school shooting they recently had in Roseburg, Oregon at Umpqua Community College, if you can believe it, recently Umpqua Community College, which has about 3,300 day students, it's very small, it received a $2.2 million federal grant. And they have a police academy, and this is all part of the militarization of America.
Wow. Yeah.
Can you believe this? $2.2 million, and the purpose of the grant was for quote-unquote student success, and it supports their police academy that they host. And they had a shooting drill.
Yep. I mean, I hate to say that I'm not overly surprised. I mean, it's still amazing to hear new things, but I'm not really surprised by it.
because that is the system that we're uncovering, and we're seeing it. It's the proverbial, the veil has been lifted. I'm sure there's more layers of the veil to be lifted, but we have had so much lifted that it's really hard not to see what's so plain and obvious to us now. And, so we have to have a little mercy and compassion on those that don't have the sight that we've developed. And, I do, like I said, believe that most people have a good heart, and, these order followers may not really know exactly what they're party to. And so we do have to maintain some grace and compassion toward them in our endeavors and our contact with them. And I also want to just thank you, Sofia, for the time that I was in the jail, for being so supportive of us in, whatever means possible that you were, and support of Kim, and just, giving her some moral support, as well as allowing her to talk to you on your show as well. So thank you so much. You're an incredible soul. I feel blessed to have you in my life.
The least I can do, David. I wish I could do so much more, but anyway, it's something, and that all those somethings add up. So I urge everybody listening to contribute something, definitely, to this journey that this family is on. They are the ones hacking and thwacking at the jungle, and we're all in that jungle. We're all walking right behind them. So thanks again, and this will be posted, and we'll share it widely. And all I can say is, until we do our next interview, and let's hope that this lets up, that it all just dissolves. Wouldn't it be wonderful if it was like the Wicked Witch and you only had to throw a bucket of water on it?
I love it, yes. That would be.
So we'll keep that image.
Yes.
All right, David. Well, goodbye for now, and very many deep thanks for this.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.